Hi, folks. Welcome back to another session, another Wednesday session where we partner with Iron Shield. Here is myself and Marco, my Wednesday co-host. We are very well accompanied this evening with Niram Ferretti, who was here last Wednesday, with Garry Powell, which I think is a familiar face if you follow my individual podcast. In terms of topics, we decided to pursue European decadence. I think there is a lot to be told about it. We want to diagnose what happened with Europe and what can we do about it. So it's not only about saying, okay, things are wrong, needs to be fixed, but what's the solution? Because I think I think we can still revert what happened. Maybe certain things cannot be repaired, but there are others that can be addressed and somehow cured. So we'll try to uh, come up with a chronology. How did we get here? What went wrong? Who is to blame? If it's us, if there are external partners, or and what's the path going forward? So I think I have a great panel for this topic. So I will now pass the ball to Marco, who will let us know in detail what are we heading to.
Excellent. So let's just reassume what Vitor said. Is the decline of European civilization irreversible? What have been its underlying causes? Are they attributable to physiological decline or to a form of collective disorientation and demoralization? We have our two guests this evening, Niram Ferretti and Craig Powell, both political and cultural analysts, and we're going to be delving into this topic in further detail in a few minutes. First, though, we have to assign our weekly golden sausage. And this week we are going beyond the Anglosphere in the name of diversity and inclusion, and we're going to award the golden sausage to a group of Italian intellectuals. Two groups, that is. One is called the Italian and Jewish Anti-Racist Laboratory. You can see here the sausage machine has gone into overdrive this week. And the other group is Never Indifferent, Voice Jewish Voices. So these people are the recipients of the golden sausage this week. So beyond the Anglosphere we go into Italy, and the worthy recipients are these two people, these two groups rather, the eh, Jewish Anti-Racist Laboratory and Never Indifferent, Jewish Voices for Peace. Never indifferent, perhaps except for indifferent to the fate of the Bibas family and all the Jewish victims. And anyway, this is a fine example of moral sausagery. And without further ado, let's see where Europe is headed to. Niram, would you like to take it away?
Yes, well, it's a very complex and vast, of course, and vast topic when we talk about the decadence of Europe and what are we exactly talking about? What is the main, what is the main issue? I think there are many issues about this topic to be talked about, and certainly we won't be able to address them all in just one time. It's as I said, it's very vast. It's very complex. You were talking before about from where does this come from, and exactly what are we talking about? For example, let's talk about the imperative of free speech, of diversity, as you said before, of inclusiveness. All of this seems to be very, very right topics. I mean, there is nothing, of course, bad about talking about inclusiveness and talking about free speech. And we should cherish free speech. We should cherish also inclusiveness, but we need to understand what we exactly mean by this very lofty ideas, these very lofty concepts. Because when we talk about inclusiveness, we generally talk about the inclusiveness of those who are not really very keen to include ourselves among them. And so this is one of the paradoxes that we face here in Europe. What am I talking about? What am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about some kind of the so-called minorities, for example. A big minority in Europe is, of course, the Islamic minority. And we need to be very careful, of course, not to discriminate anyone. And certainly we must be extremely careful not to discriminate Muslims. Because otherwise, if we do have some exceptions about Islam, about Muslims, immediately we are called Islamophobes. So this is exactly one of those words that is not really something that pushes us forward to free speech. No, it immediately restricts the area of a free speech, because if we cannot make any kind of criticism towards, I was just making an example, towards Islam, then this idea of free speech seems to be very peculiar, because free speech should be the freedom to talk, not in a derogative manner, about every kind of topic. And so just the idea of criticizing someone and pointing our fingers to things that don't really work and are not really coherent with our culture, our traditions, our values. Well, if we cannot afford to make this kind of criticism, and because immediately we are called racists and we are called in derogative manners, then this is a big problem. And we see this happening a lot, of course, here in Europe. Not only in Europe, of course, we're talking about Europe, but we can also extend this issue to the United States, where it has been even stronger in the last decade, and not only in the last decade, it has been very, very strong and more even violent than what has happened here and what is happening here in Europe. Even if we are approaching that venue, so this is just one example of the problem. As I said before, the idea of including and the idea of free speech should be something that, if it's really a value to pursue, it must include everyone. So what I said before, usually the idea that usually this inclusion, we must include people that have a strong, not exactly the same ideas that we have about culture and about inclusiveness. And as I said before, I'm talking about Muslim, about Islam. It's not very inclusive towards towards Europe, but then we need to be inclusive towards them. So, as I said before, we have this kind of paradox. And this brings to a sort of creates, of course, a clash, creates a problem.
Sort of a dead end. It sort of comes.
It's a dead end. It's a cul-de-sac. Yeah. Exactly. It's a dead end. So this is just one of one example. We can make other examples, of course, but I would like to leave now space to Craig Powell to say to express his opinion.
Well, I think we need to go back in time a little bit. The problems we're facing at the moment are problems with quite distant historical roots, I would say. And the problem of Muslim immigration in Europe, which is becoming an existential problem, I would say, has its roots in a much deeper decline of the European civilization, I would say. And it seems to me that if you want to look at the causes of this, I mean, I studied history, and I'm very interested in history. And it seems to me that the fundamental problems that we're facing are that we have largely abandoned Judeo-Christian values, at least. Most people in Western Europe no longer have any sort of spiritual tradition, and those traditions, those values, were what united our societies until roughly 100 years ago, 100, 150 years ago. And Nietzsche predicted that once God was dead, in fact, we would have a completely materialistic culture, which is what we've got. And once you have a completely materialistic culture, it basically ceases to believe in itself. And we've also had an increase in the so-called progressive ideology pretty much everywhere in the West. And that's all based on the idea that the human being is perfectible, this sort of Rousseauian idea that the human being is perfectible if only we can legislate and force everybody to behave in a certain way, which I think is nonsense. It's all this very bad French philosophy of Foucault and Derrida and so on, which has infiltrated all of the universities and basically all of our cultural institutions, has led to a weakening of the idea of Western civilization, which is now basically seen as repressive, exploitative, brutal, right? And because of that, we are supposed to open our doors to the entire world. And very obviously it's not working. We have these constant massacres going on now in France and Germany particularly. And this multiculturalism is not working. And well, perhaps before I go on to talk about possible solutions to that, I mean, I'm very much oversimplifying, of course, but I think we're dealing with an ideology which is espoused by the ruling class, by the elite in Western Europe, which is intellectually bankrupt, and which we know from experience of leftist governments everywhere simply doesn't work.
That's very interesting. You raise a very interesting point from a philosophical point of view. The influence of French philosophy, and especially les philosophes and Rousseau onwards, and it sort of contrasts with a much more common sense Anglo-Saxon Burkean approach to the human condition. Indeed. Niram?
Yes, I completely agree. Of course, when we mention such philosophers as Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida, we talk about, especially Foucault, that we talk about two of the most influential thinkers of the last 40, 50 years, certainly. Those who have mostly influenced many departments of academia, not particularly in the United States, not only in the United States, because of course they are French, so they are European. So the influence was very strong, but nearly immediately, because Foucault, for a period of his life, was taught at Berkeley, if I'm not wrong. So in the United States, I don't remember exactly what was the university where he taught, but he was there for a long period, quite long, and his ideas were very popular, and they are still very popular. And the main idea is that of course, I'm simplifying, but everything is about power. Everything is about power, and we need to understand that truth is just a fiction mainly, and this is a Nietzschean idea. It comes from Friedrich Nietzsche, who is at the back of Michel Foucault, because these philosophers are all philosophers, mainly Foucault and Derrida, not only them, who are part of what in France was called the Nietzsche Renaissance, the movement of those philosophers who rediscovered the thought of Friedrich Nietzsche and started interpreting Nietzsche again, and with using also Marxist thought and mixing it together with Nietzsche, and it came out that the main issue is that of power. So if power is the truth behind the scene, there is no truth, and this is a paradox, of course, because if there is no truth, power cannot be the truth of everything. So it deconstructs itself. No, it's a logical paradox. But let's stick to the idea that power is behind the scene and it rules everything. Then of course we need to take issue about power and start understanding who are the victims of power. And so when we identify the victims of power and we're able to identify them clearly, then we need to have the culprits, because if there is a victim, there is a culprit, and to make this distinction very clear. And we will cherish the victims, of course, because if they are victims, they need to be cherished as victims, and we need to compensate them for the role of victims. And this is all that wokeism is about, because wokeism is a root. It's a consequence of this way of thinking. It's the most simplistic, the less sophisticated consequence of thought of this way of thinking that comes from this interpretation of Nietzsche, from Foucault and Derrida, and its popularization. Of course, it's Nietzsche for dummies. It's this kind of the wokeism. It's Nietzsche for dummies at the end, Foucault for dummies mainly, and so this is the scenario, the landscape where we are right now. Even if I might say that wokeism is it's slightly going down the slope. It's still popular, but not as popular as it was some years ago.
There's a reaction.
There is a reaction, and
we certainly see a reaction. Yes.
Let me just say thank you to Paul, who wrote a comment, giving us a compliment, saying very interesting discussion. So thank you very much for that. And I also want to encourage the other viewers to put their comments in the chat box, whether they agree with Paul or not. Now, we are open to be challenged. We just want to make this conversation as transparent, as straightforward as possible. I just want to throw one thing here. So it seems that the relations of power have been prevailing, and I don't think that's very healthy if we look at the human interactions, from that angle. Because okay, there are relations of power, but I think we cannot confine every single interaction to that. There are other things. And then the way they put it, it seems that there is a narrow fraction of humanity who was having a good time for ages, so they were enjoying the party, whereas the others were just being abused and mistreated. Now that leads to resentment, because a lot of individuals will feel that their upbringing is unfair, their ancestors were being oppressed, so there will be plenty of anger and bitterness, which I don't think is the feelings that people should pursue. There are other things in life that are way more appealing than that. And when I see those woke warriors, or that's what I like to call it, woke warriors, I sense, I can even if they don't open the mouth, I sense the negativity, I sense the darkness, and they are not happy people. So, but it seems that there's no way out of that. It seems that gives them some meaning. So where I'm going with that, I think they are filling a gap. They are filling a gap because there's nothing else in life than that battle. So I think it all goes down to that vacuum that people have inside of them, and maybe that could be filled with other things, like some aspects of tradition. How did we get here and all that? So how come that we are in this vacuum? Do you have any justification for that? I will bring the ball back to Garry.
Yes, I agree with everything Niram said. Actually, I thought that was a very good analysis, but I'd like to add something. Actually, you're quite right that wokeism is a kind of Nietzsche for dummies, if you like, a sort of debased form of Nietzscheanism. But I think it's also a kind of, perhaps paradoxically, a kind of Christianity for dummies, in a way, in that if you look at the prevailing ethical, the ethics of wokeism are very similar to the ethics of Christianity in the sense that it's the meek shall inherit the earth, right? The last shall be first and the first shall be last, and it's all about elevating the humble and humbling the exalted. And of course, this was Nietzsche's problem with Christianity. He thought it was a sort of slave, a religion for slaves, basically. And I think Nietzsche was not, well, let's not get into a big discussion about Nietzsche. It's far too complicated. But I think what the woke have done is they've taken the best parts of Christianity, which is Jesus, really, the spiritual part, and they've got rid of that, and they've taken an extremely childishly simple ethics. They made an ethics out of resentment, basically. What Nietzsche called a ressentiment, the French term. So that's where we are, and it is the logical consequence of a society which no longer believes in anything. I mean, if you don't have any spiritual center, or even any interest in your history anymore, in your traditions, then of course everything is about power, and so then it becomes a question of how do we readjust society so that it's completely fair for everyone? I mean, they seem to think that that's a possibility. I don't, but I think the other problem we have is that the West has become an ahistorical society, Most people no longer read history. They no longer care about it. So that there's an incredible ignorance, even among our educated classes. I used to teach in an American university, and most of my fellow professors knew very little history. This is the truth. There's this kind of idea that history is bunk, as Henry Ford said. And if history is bunk and we don't know anything about our past, then why should we honor our ancestors, these people who sacrificed so much for us? Actually, it just becomes a matter of what can we get out of life? So in some senses, the postmodern position is logical, but it's based on completely false premises, in my view. And I think a lot of people don't understand the extent to which postmodern philosophy really completely dominates the academy in America, in Britain for sure, increasingly in Europe too. And for example, Niram mentioned that Foucault taught in America. So did Derrida, actually. And you know, where those ideas really took off was in America. Well, that was where they were really taken over lock, stock, and barrel in the last 10 or 15 years. I mean, almost all academics in America now are leftist, and quite radical leftist, actually.
Yeah. It seems as if all the moral categories and the assumptions underpinning language have been to a great extent eroded, and that people now generally tend to ride an emotive wave. This seems to be the guiding philosophy or operative concept.
Yes, I think this is true, and I think that when you start when the premises is that there is no truth, there is no objectivity, then of course you rely mainly on emotions and on subjectivity. So it's true what I believe is true. It's true what I think is true. I am my own truth, and this brings us, of course, to the idea that I can determine my identity in the way I wish to determine it, because there is no core at my there is no core. There is no essentiality. There is no being. It's just a matter of, and this is again Foucault, who reads Nietzsche. There are just ideas and interpretations. There are no facts, as Nietzsche said. They're just their own interpretations. So if there are own interpretations, I can interpret reality in the way I wish to interpret reality, and I can interpret myself how I feel to interpret myself. And so this brings us to the collapse, of course, of every kind of objectivity, and to the collapse of, as you said before, Marco, of language and of reality, because all these elements are intertwined. You cannot have reality without language, and you cannot have thought without language, and you cannot have truth without reality. So if I start undermining reality, if I start undermining the meta category of truth, everything falls apart. I was mentioning last week a poem by Yeats, The Second Coming, and Yeats at The Second Coming writes, "If the center does not hold, everything falls apart." And it's exactly what's going on. There is no center. And we have been witnessing that the absence of the center has brought where the center was there before all those actors, all those issues that were at the margins of the center. So immediately they started to approach the vacuum that has been left empty by the center. So, and I'm talking about, of course, minorities and people who before were left out mainly by the the, the mainstream narrative, which I'm not saying that they don't deserve to have a space. I'm not saying, I'm denying, of course, that they don't deserve to be watched and they don't deserve to be listened to. They do, of course, but they cannot become the center of everything. This is a consequence, a consequence of creating, idolizing the so-called victim and the so-called minorities, and putting them in the place where before there were people who are in the category now, been fixed in the category of oppressors. And we so this is it, and this is the main. It's very Manichaean. It's very schematic. It's very black and white, of course, narrative that goes on. It's again about power. It's again about struggle. It's again about right and wrong, where of course right is only on one side, wrong is always on another side. Victims are clearly these, and the oppressors are clearly those. So this is the way in which we start approaching and understanding what is all about, and it's a way of course, of not sticking to reality. It's a representation, a completely falsified representation of how things are, because things are far more complicated than this.
Talking of it, I don't know if you would know, guys, but not everyone who's watching us is maybe aware. It was a very famous poet, was a brilliant poet, one of the top poets here in Ireland, but he was also very much into theater, and he was a prominent figure of the Abbey Theatre, which is a theater there in Dublin city centre. Now I want to fast forward to the current times. So the Abbey Theatre a couple of months ago refused to play some performance which was related to October the 7th. Whose theater company, I don't remember if it was Israelis or not, but they were Jewish related. So they refused because they came up with some nonsense, stupid excuse saying they don't have time or the schedule, it's not suitable. Basically, they just bullshit the public. A few months later, they opened space to Palestinian companies, which of course was not a surprise. So that tells where are we at the moment: hypocrisy, double standards, and culture is on the hands of people that you cannot trust. So I want to just say I want to highlight that the theater sphere, it's in the hands of the devil, and that's very, very scary, because there were times where culture would challenge the status quo, and now it's the opposite. Culture is one of the main agents. So we need to shame them. Sorry for the term, but we need to shame them, because what they did to the Jewish community when there are still a good dozen hostage in Gaza was reprehensible. So I want to shame them here in public.
That resonates to a great extent with the recipients of the Golden Sausage this evening, who define themselves as Jews and Italian Jewesses, say no to ethnic cleansing. Italy shouldn't be an accomplice to this. So here is a perfect example of the distortion of reality. There is no objective truth, and there is no capacity to articulate moral constructs. Okay, here we see a fine example of the disintegration of moral categories. We are living essentially in a moral babel. Any comments?
Yes, I think. Let me just start with a little. anecdote in British Parliament today, the Labour Party are proposing a new bill which would give lighter sentences for crimes committed by members of ethnic minorities, and we know that they mean Muslims. But basically, we're talking about the rape gangs and so on, which raped hundreds of thousands, at least, of underage British girls. So, I mean, this is the first time in history that I know of that a ruling class is actually suggesting that the native population should be subject to harsher laws than the visitors. I mean, it's a completely insane, crazy thing. I mean,
well, it subverts the total notion of equality before the law.
Yes, which is
a basic moral imperative, a basic element, an essential ingredient to justice, and we all know that. Sorry, I interrupted you, Garry.
No, that's fine. I completely agree, and that's been a principle. I mean, not always upheld, but
not always upheld.
A principle of British justice since 1215, since Magna Carta. I mean, we were, and in fact, even before, even Alfred the Great's laws held that principle that everyone should be subject to the law. And yet, we have more than 80 Sharia law courts functioning in England now, and a parallel justice system. The police know about it. They don't do anything about it because they're afraid. I mean, it's a travesty of justice. It's completely absurd. So, I mean, if we want to save Europe, if that's feasible, one of the first things we have to do is put a stop to that and say, if you want to live in Europe, everyone is going to be subject to the same law. I mean, that's absolutely fundamental, I think.
Yeah, that's quite unique. Like I remember when I lived in Hungary or Poland, so I couldn't speak the native language. So to an extent, I was a second-class citizen, but that was my choice because I didn't put the effort to learn the language. Okay, so that I don't blame I never blame the natives or the country. It was me that didn't put the effort. So I understand that I was a couple of steps back and I was somehow at disadvantage. So by default, if you are a native, you are ahead. Okay, it's not that you're going to be object of better treatment, but there is some benefit from being a native. So now that they are turning it around, I think that's unique in history. At least I haven't heard of that, Garry.
Niram?
Well, yes. So the fact that there cannot be equality before the law if someone is considered to be the victim, and so he must be more equal than other people, of course, before the law. So this is what goes on, as Craig said before, in Great Britain, and not only there, of course, and for many years now, Douglas Murray has been exposing what goes on, has been going on, and is still going on, of course, in Great Britain, and it's astonishing, but it's a consequence of all that we have been talking about before. It's a consequence. Here in Italy, it's less strong because, of course, we have another kind of history, and the minority, the Muslim minority especially, is not as conspicuous as it is in Great Britain, and it's far smaller, and so we don't have that kind of problem as you have in France, for example, of course, and you have in Great Britain, and you have to a certain extent also in Germany and in other countries, but indeed in Belgium, where and so on. So, as I said before, this is a consequence of what we have been talking before, and again, we see this very. Craig was talking before about history and the fact that the knowledge of history is not is not as it was before the knowledge of history, and we have a travesty of history on again, and it's a history which divides. It's very simplistic. Again, the oppressors, they're again the victims, and everything is taught and is approached in this very infantile and this very simplistic way. So this is the main one of the is the most popular. I should say so. This is the most popular way in which history today is thought, and the consequences are clearly in front of us.
They're plain for all to see.
We have one. Sorry, no, I was just going to add to finish.
Yeah.
We can see this in a very, very clear and dramatic way, and it has been going on for many years, of course, in relation to what goes on in Israel. You see this in the most clear and strongest way. We have the people who are being taught to be the victims, who are the Palestinians, the Arabs, and on the other hand, those who are considered to be the oppressors, who are, of course, the Israelis, the Jews. And this fiction is extremely strong, and today is the main fiction of victimization that we have in the world, mainly. The idea that we have oppressors and victims, and it's very, very clear who are the victims, and it's very, very clear who are the oppressor. The underdog is are the Palestinians, and this fiction is so powerful, so strong, that people just buy it immediately without any concern that it might be travesty, without the idea that they need to understand if it is really a travesty, if it is really a truth, and they buy it immediately because it's very seducing. It seduces you immediately. Oh, I see the underdogs, and I feel an underdog, and I feel immediately towards him. My emotions, my empathy is
exactly. It appeals on an emotional level. It appeals to a childish emotional level.
Absolutely.
It's when you argue with a toddler, for example. You can't really argue with a toddler because there's no logical possibility to do so to a great extent. That is the way their mind works. I wanted to connect back to the notion of lack of knowledge of history, because that impacts greatly on a sense of identity. And I think this is a central aspect in the general disorientation, and I would say a sense of anomie that is all pervasive in Europe now. Durkheim already identified this phenomenon over 100 years ago, and I think this is a central aspect in Europe itself now, a total loss of identity, which is necessary to navigate reality. You have to understand who you are to understand where you want to go to a certain extent. And I see this as the greatest threat, the crumbling of national and also religious identities to a great extent. And this is created what I wouldn't even call it a chink anymore. It is a huge crack within which other forces are coming in to fill this vacuum. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree totally. That's certainly the case. I don't know what we do about it. I mean, at the moment, when we still have left-wing governments in control of most of Western Europe, I don't know where to start, because kids are being brainwashed. I mean, there's no doubt about it, throughout the educational system, and not just the educational system. It's every single cultural institution: the theaters, film, museums, everything. Here's another little anecdote. This week, the British Imperial War Museum decided to close its room where they honored winners of the Victoria Cross and George Cross. These are the bravest, the bravest men from the British armed forces, actually, and civilians in the case of the George Cross. So they've closed this down because they feel that it promoted colonialism. That these people who gave their lives for Britain were fighting for empire. I mean, I don't know what to say, really, except that these people are traitors. They are literally traitors to our entire heritage. They want to destroy our heritage.
Certainly do. They certainly. Now, there's also a very uncritical approach to history when we speak about colonialism, as if colonialism was purely a European phenomenon, as well as if slavery itself was purely a European phenomenon, when indeed it was rife in Black Africa long before the colonial powers arrived. Indeed, there was interior colonialism within Africa itself. The slave trade would not have been possible without the input of the local populations, and it remained an institution within Africa long after the colonial powers disengaged. And truth be told, it's also the colonial powers that put an end to the slave trade. Britain was at the forefront of putting an end to the slave trade. People also neglect to mention that the slave trade has continued well into the 21st century within Islamic countries, also in Central Africa. So the force field is being put up not just to an interpretation of facts, but to facts themselves.
Yes.
Yeah. On that note, Marco, let me add one thing here that happened this week. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Brazilian Carnival. It's basically a parade where people dance, drink, and everything that comes with it. Okay, just to make it short.
We want some of that.
Yes, we want some of that as it was in the past, because this event, to my best knowledge, wasn't politicized at all. It was all fun, colors, dance, beautiful women, handsome men, if you like it. So there was a lot of entertainment on that parade. It was for a week. People won't work and just enjoy themselves. It was pure hedonism. Now, I'm not endorsing a life oriented by pleasure on this, but still a better deal.
Yeah.
Still a better deal than the politicization that happened this year. So it turned out that one of the groups, between the dancers, someone was holding the head of a former Portuguese king, saying, "We have his head. We are taking over." Now, this country that I respect a lot, and as you know, I have friends there. I do business with Brazil. I actually visited Brazil in September, so people cannot say I'm a racist or anything like that. Brazil is independent since the 18th century. I can't remember now the exact year, but it's more than 200 years now that they are independent. I think it's way too late to infect their major festivity with politics. It's even sad, because all they have in that week was fun and pleasure, and now resentment is taking over. Now, I feel sorry even for the Brazilians. I'm not even talking about myself as Portuguese, like there's no room for politics in that parade. That parade, it's pure fun. Actually, there are Brazilian individuals who are quite, who are quite poor. Let's put it like that. They live in a very small budget the whole year, and all they want is to have a fantastic week, whether
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
by
yeah.
interacting with others and getting to know
Mhm.
other, that neighborhood that they cannot mingle with because they are too far and they cannot afford to get on a taxi. And now it's not no longer about communities; it's about politics, which is very,
Mm.
very sad. Very sad that
Yeah.
I always saw that parade as something that is fun. It's no longer the case. So I feel very
Mm.
sorry for my Brazilian fellows.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned something very interesting because it is the attempt by certain forces to take possession of culture at every level. And this was particularly pronounced, and I think Niram will confirm this, in Italy. Because at a certain point, to be involved in cultural endeavor in Italy, one had to be a card holding member of the Communist Party. It became, I, I have much, I have a lot of anecdotal evidence where people tell me to have a career, people were required to take out membership of the Communist Party in Italy. So this has a long history. It's not something that has come out of the blue. It has a long history. These people understood that to gain control and influence within society, culture is one of the central vectors, one of the main vehicles, along, of course, with the judiciaries. We see the convergence, the confluence of a number of elements, and I think we see it in a number of countries. We see it in Italy, we see it in Israel, we see it Great Britain, where academia, entertainment, the judiciary, they all come together, especially in recent years, they coalesce around Palestinism. How about that? You see the all-pervasive Palestinian flag, and it's become almost as if they have coalesced into one organism. They are they move in harmony. Okay, the moves are coordinated. A
Mhm.
few thoughts to play with.
Well, indeed, the hegemony of culture and of academia. Uh, this comes out from the theorization, and it was put into practice, of course, of one of the leading Italian thinkers of the 20th century, who was Antonio Gramsci. Cultural
Indeed,
hegemony, of course,
indeed.
and Herbert Marcuse in the United States exactly said the same things. We need to take the citadel of culture. We need to, because of course we will teach and we will brainwash people and we will make them put them in their heads the idea we want to put them in their heads. The idea that are right for us, they will be the truth of tomorrow. And of course, we can even mention George Orwell, of course, because this goes very well down that path. I mean, it's the hegemony of culture has been one of the greatest achievements. That was one of the greatest achievements, of course, of progressiveness of coming from the left, and it was a great, and it is still a main achievement, and it has been shaping, and it's still shaping the conscience of people. He brought up the issue of Palestinianism, and Palestinianism is a religion mainly. It's a layman religion. Of course, it's something that, because as Chesterton said many a long time ago, the human being is intrinsically religious, even if he doesn't recognize it. But it is. He is. So if he denies religion, when he denies religion, when he denies God, he needs to put something else in the place of God, something else in the place of religion. And this is his natural attitude. It's something that it's in which he is inside. It's not something about which human beings are really rationally aware. It's something that comes from the depth of humanity, from the depth of Jung would have said, from the depth of something of archetypes that are cultural archetypes, symbolic archetypes that inform our beings, our conscience, without us knowing, without us being aware of them, of course. But this will bring us far away. So indeed, when a political party is able to gain access to those venues that have the power to shape conscience, to shape concepts, to shape words, well, that's the greatest achievements, of course. And George Orwell in 1984 showed us very clearly that reality is shaped by language, that concepts are shaped by language.
Right.
And so if we start those who are the owners, let's say so, of language can shape reality and can shape consciences. And this is the power of propaganda. It's the power of lies, and it's very, very, very strong. It's indeed very, very strong. And today, paradoxically, we are living in an epoch where there is a lot of information, but at the same time there is a lot of misinformation, and there is a lot of incapability to really discern between good information and bad information. And because, as Craig said before, there is a little knowledge, for example, of history. If we don't know history, we don't understand history, we don't know where we come from, we don't know who we are, we will be unable to understand the present, of course, and to have the instruments to be able to know where truth is and where lies are. So this is extremely important. This lack of knowledge is, of course, goes along with the idea that identity is something bad. Is something bad for us. Identity is a form of violence that we exert against other people, mainly against ourselves, but also against other people.
I would go even further. I would say it is necessary to have the necessary prejudices in place in order to join the dots and to create a coherent picture and to articulate moral constructs. Vitor, we have a couple of questions. Would you like to repeat them? And the panel can,
Yeah, speaking of wording, so there's one comment from James Powell. I think he was complimenting what Garry was saying a few minutes ago. There's also the suggestion of creating a blasphemy law in Britain, clearly for the benefit of the Muslims. And the other one is from Paul. He asked, "Are we living in an age of hairless men and hairy women?" Yeah, that's maybe his comment came right in the middle of the carnival, I would say. So, Garry, your turn.
Well, okay. Let's start with James's comment. I mean, that very much is a comment on what Niram was just saying. I think that this the blasphemy law being proposed is actually a law against Islamophobia, specifically for Islamophobia. And in fact, although we don't formally have that law yet, there's no question that Islamophobia is already being punished. I mean, we had, I think 4,000. It was James himself who told me that 4,000 people were arrested in Britain last year for comments posted on social media, and all of those, almost all of them anyway, were Islamophobic comments. So, I mean, free speech is certainly very much under attack in Britain, but Muslims can make comments about Christians, or Jews, and so there've been lots of extremely nasty ones about Jews, as I'm sure you know.
Garry, so if it's only comments, it's not as bad.
Yeah, right. Yeah, okay.
What about the hairy women and the hairless men? That's what we want to hear about, Craig.
Well, this is that it sounds like a kind of flippant comment, but in fact, I think it in a sense there is something profound here, in that if there is no objective reality, and we are all anything we want to be, then of course traditional categories, including biological categories, are eroded, right? And this is one of the reasons why the transgender movement has become one of the causes most dear to the progressives, because I think that there's no question they want to break down the family, and they want to break down traditional gender roles. I think so that people are more subservient to the state, basically, to a sort of Marxist state. So I mean,
to create the dysfunctionality necessary to subvert the old order.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, in individual terms, I have nothing against gay people, or hairless men or hairy women. I have no problem whatsoever, and or with transgender people. But the problem is when these things are being promoted, as they actually are being promoted and encouraged in schools, for example, and where people who are probably mainly gay are being told that they're actually transgender, they've been born in the wrong body, and they need to have treatment and be mutilated, basically. This to me is a shocking, abhorrent phenomenon. So yeah, I think it's a serious attack on. It's an attack on reality, fundamentally.
I put it to you that there are forces that want to make us into sausages. They want to make us all the same as well. How about that? Let me be a little bit provocative. I'm going to float this idea. Are prejudices always bad?
Niram, do you want to start?
Well, it's a provocative idea, of course. I don't think that prejudices are always bad. They might be wrong, but if they are wrong, they at the same time they can say us something that they can put us into a path that can lay us to understand better who we are and who the other is, and we go back to the main question, which is that of identity. And one of the greatest problems is that we live in an epoch where identity is, as I said before, is being very, very strongly attacked, because it's something that is thought to be inherently violent, And this, on a philosophical level, goes with the attack towards metaphysics and towards the idea that reality has a structure, that being has a structure, that there are boundaries. This is another very important issue, the issue of boundaries. Are there boundaries, or are there no boundaries? Are boundaries something that really that exists into reality in order for us to be able to categorize reality and understand reality as it is inherently, or are categories just social constructs? Are categories just something that is made up, is created culturally? And of course, all of postmodernism says that there are no boundaries. That is always a question. We go back to the idea of Foucault, to the idea of Derrida, that it's all a question of power. Boundaries are there because power has created boundaries. But this is a travesty of truth, because from physics, we know that there are boundaries. We know that reality has a structure. Mathematics, science tells us that reality has a structure. It's not chaos. It's not something that comes that we are unable to define. One of the most famous phrases of Albert Einstein was that one of the most surprising things is that we can understand rationally the universe. Why can we understand rationally the universe? Why can mathematics makes us understand rationally the universe? Because there is a structure.
And we seek that, and we seek that structure.
And we seek our structure, exactly.
And we require structure to impart meaning to life. And there cannot be even a notion of freedom without boundaries. In order to have freedom, you have to define something. For example, the freedom of the bird requires a definition of a bird. The freedom of a moral agent requires an understanding of boundaries, which encapsulate the moral agent. Sorry if I interrupted you.
No, absolutely. Thank you for your interruption, because it's exactly like this. So science is an antidote to wokeism, in a certain sense.
Indeed.
Because it says things that are completely against the idea that, for example, you can create your own identity, and then you are free to do whatever you want about yourself and to define reality in the way you want to define reality. Science says exactly the opposite. As I'm thinking about some Richard Dawkins was attacked recently because he just mentioned these obvious and common sense things that science itself and biology allows us to understand that there is a structure. And so,
and we need that prejudice in place. We need that conceptual prejudice in place to navigate reality and to seek meaning. Let me just turn to Garry. What do you think about that, prejudices? Because perhaps prejudices are something that a healthy society requires to admit and to perhaps to repulse elements which might undermine it. It needs to be able to distinguish what is good for a society, who should come in, which elements strengthen the social fabric and which undermine it.
Yeah, I might take a little bit of issue with the actual word prejudice. I think I understand what you're saying. I mean, what prejudice means is that you've made up your mind about something before looking at the evidence. It means prejudging, and I'm not sure we want to do that.
Well, that's sorry. I just say that is an element that we have to have in place before we can even examine the evidence. We have to have a sort of a conceptual framework which allows us to interpret reality.
Yes, that's true. Of course, yeah. Yes, you do. You have to have. I mean, science works on the assumption that that reality is comprehensible, and that on the basis of evidence and observation, we can understand it, and any faults in our theories we modify our hypotheses, don't we, on the basis of further evidence? But we do certainly start with those assumptions. So
the term is a little deliberately provocative, by the way. Just
I would agree with you, and let me throw another provocation back at you, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
You know, I think most people, including more conservative people these days, are mostly atheistic, and I certainly, I've been an atheist for most of my life, but I've come to understand that most physicists, for example, accept the fact that certainly most of the great physicists, people like Max Planck, for example, have accepted the principle or prejudice, if you like, that consciousness actually preceded matter. In other words, that there was a creator. And, you know, we don't necessarily have to accept the findings of any particular religion, but it does seem to me that, you know, to go back to what all of this discussion revolves around really is the fact that we have lost our sense of values, and that some sort of the spiritual vacuum at the heart of certainly Europe and increasingly America too is I think causing all of these problems. Now, whether we can go back to some sort of religious worldview or not, I think it was Marco who was saying that. No, I can't remember who said it now, but that we are essentially religious, and if we don't have a sort of coherent religion, we'll come up with an incoherent one. Basically, perhaps it was Niram who said that.
Yes, I was citing Chesterton.
Yeah, and you know, I agree with that, and you know, wokeism doesn't work. Marxism doesn't work. We've got plenty of evidence for that, really. And the late 20th century liberal consensus, which is basically was just that life is meaningless, so we're just going to have fun and amass as much material possessions as we can. That doesn't work either. We've seen what happens when we adopt that prejudice. So I think we either go back to some sort of Judeo-Christian tradition, or else in the vacuum something else will come, and I'm not sure what that will be.
So still on the prejudice topic, I was just thinking here, like the wokeists, they are the ones who have prejudice all the time. When they assume when you are white you are privileged, that's a prejudice. And if you are hetero and male, you are the top of the pyramid. This is the definition of prejudice. So they are accusing us of what they are. It's the mirror effect. And there are plenty of other examples.
Absolutely.
But on prejudice, it's a classic example. When they tell, look at your skin, you are privileged. Look at your gender, you are privileged. So isn't it a prejudice? I think it is. And I think I understood what a prejudice is. And they embody that from A to Z. So this is a scandal. They are accusing us of what they are 100%. Another thing I was thinking here myself is in terms of survival. We need prejudices. They are absolutely necessary. And I'm throwing away now all these race conversations and gender and all that, just to be very realistic, okay? Like where I live, there are a couple of neighborhoods that are not that recommended. Okay, who lives there? And I'm gonna say it out loud: Irish Gypsy communities. So they're all white. I'm not being racist here. Okay, I'm saying Irish travelers or Irish Gypsy, whatever you want to call it. Now I don't go there. And maybe I'm exaggerating a bit, but maybe that saved my life, or at least I was not having a fight at, I don't know, at midnight after leaving the pub or something like that. So we need to have this information in advance to prevent conflicts, to prevent hassle, to avoid being in situations that we don't want to be. It's that simple. It's survival. We need to be aware of things, not to face them. We all live in a jungle, like it or not. So it's absolutely necessary to have information in advance to not find ourselves in situations that we don't desire. So it's just so having prejudices is an absolute must to navigate wisely in the road. Now, one thing is, let's say, we know that we know that Arabs, for instance, they tend not to drink. So if I want to invite an Arab business partner for a meeting, I will invite him for a cup of tea, okay? Because I tend to think that he's not drinking. But I'm not going to assume that. I'm not assuming. I'm just thinking that based on statistics. So end of the day, this is all numerical and reality based. This is not something against a specific race or anything like that. We navigate towards the future based on the knowledge we acquired from the past. That's all that is. Otherwise, how can you go forward? Maybe you can, but not for a long time. You will be injured or you're going to have a bad time. So it's a survival instinct. It's all that is.
Niram, you're chomping at the bit.
Yes, well, it's again, we need to understand that we cannot throw away the baby with the dirty water. Of course, the past has many things. We're talking about prejudices. Of course, there are things that we would not like to have back from the past, but certainly there are things that we cherish from the past. So we need to make distinctions. And Edward Burke was very, very, very clear about this. We cannot just say that the past is something completely good, but at the same time, we cannot say that the past is something completely bad. So again, it's a very simplistic way of approaching reality. And I would like to add something to what Vitor was saying before about specific groups. He was talking about Irish Gypsies. I can talk about, of course, Muslims. And well, these groups have a very strong sense of their own identity. So we have this sort of paradox now that we need to not to fix too much. We are told, not that we need, we are told that we don't need to stick to our identity too much, because our identity is inherently violent, intrinsically violent, is a sort of abuse toward other people. But at the same time, the other people towards whom we don't need to have this strong sense of ourselves have a strong sense of themselves, and they stick to this strong sense of themselves very, 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 very strongly. Muslims are among the people who most strongly stick to their own to their religion, to their being part, even if they are not religious themselves, to being part of an ethnic group.
Yeah.
And certainly gypsies do that very, 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 very strongly. They stick and they cherish their traditions. But
just on that note, I challenged the progressives, and I said, so why do we allow minorities to have a strong sense of identity? And their answer is, it's part of their culture, which is nonsense. Because we used to be like that. Just we drop the ball or the towel, or whatever you want to call it. So why we cannot reinstate that?
Yeah.
And we give permission to others. I don't know why are we on our
Right.
knees.
No,
Why is that?
you raise an interesting point, and I see no problem with Muslims having a strong sense of their own country in their own countries. The problem is when they arrive in Europe and they want to impose an agenda on the host population. And I think that is a problem. I think a minority that cannot successfully weave itself into the social fabric of a host nation represents some kind of threat. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, completely. And there's no doubt about that. I mean, in Britain, I think we're only supposed to have about 4 million Muslims, and yet the mayors of most of the major British cities, including London, Leeds, Oxford, they're Muslims,
Mm,
and
right.
they are increasingly imposing um, the Muslim way of life, and with the collusion of really crazy progressives. I saw I don't know if you've seen this picture. There was a picture yesterday of a British policeman kneeling before imams in the
Mm.
street.
No, I haven't seen that, but I'd
Yeah,
be interested in seeing. I'd be interested in seeing it.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah. Mm,
shocking abasement.
mm,
And even the royal family, Garry, I think they were preparing meals for the Muslim community. If not meals, they were preparing
Yeah. They were
or
preparing.
tea,
Yeah,
something. They were
yeah.
doing.
The king was preparing the
iftar. Yeah,
iftar, yeah, for
yeah,
the
yeah,
Ramadan, if iftar actually with his wife.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I find that a bit disturbing as well, particularly as he no longer calls himself the defender of the faith. He
Mm,
was theoretically the head of the Church of England, but in the coronation, he called himself the defender of the faiths, which is very different, actually.
mm,
So he's no longer upholding the Church of England, the Christian religion.
mm,
He's saying that all religions are equal, and that sounds very nice. But what does it really mean? Because it's the Muslims who are really active in their faith. I mean, there are more people going to mosques now in England than are going to churches. So I mean, there's very little doubt that's the if we don't take action, that's the future of Britain. The native population will be replaced.
mm,
Given the given the extent of the immigration and the birth rate
mm,
of Muslims, there's a very serious possibility that we'll have a Muslim majority within 20 or 30 years, certainly by the end of the century. And then that's goodbye England, isn't
mm.
it?
Yeah, it's goodbye Europe in general if that trend continues.
Yeah.
But we can't blame the Muslims for everything.
No,
Let's
no.
be honest. It is something the native populations have been sleepwalked
Mm.
into oblivion and perdition by elites. Religion, of course, has been traditionally a central driver. The the need to create families, to be part of something greater than oneself. We go back to Edmund Burke. We inherit something which we're duty bound to transmit to future generations. You can't transmit anything to future generations if you don't have children. So
Mm.
the fact that let's say people have been deprogrammed from having children has really laid the groundwork for forces that, let's be frank, we can't even speak of replacement conspiracy. It's a reality.
Yeah.
The great
It's demography.
mm, Yeah.
Yes, it's
Yeah,
as you said. It's not a question of being a conspiracy of endorsing conspiracy theories. It's just a question of birth rate and of statistics. You look at statistics and you just have something. You have a scientific approach to reality again. So. I'm not saying that science is the bulwark of everything, but it certainly gives us a lot of insight and the capacity to make good distinctions, and we need to make good distinctions in a world where we are told that distinctions are not possible, that we cannot make real distinctions. So certainly, this is very important.
Yeah.
Indeed.
And
I used to
of
be
course,
the
as you said
darkest
rightly before, Marco, it's not a question of Muslims being no, sorry. No, it's not a question of Muslim being the main problem, but certainly they are part of a problem, but they're not the main problem. There are other problems, of course, and they are part of it. And so we need to start and analyzing things in the right way, and trying our best to speak the truth, and saying a spade is a spade, and it's not just pretending that things are otherwise, because this is completely something that would bring us only havoc. It would bring us only decay, and if we don't speak truth. And truth is not something that must be pleasant. Pleasantness and truth are two completely different concepts. Truth can be very harsh at times, can be very unpleasant, but it's truth, and it's something that is we need to face it when even if it's not pleasant, because it's and when
A little bit of lag there, Niram, on
think
at
it's
your end,
breaking.
I think.
are synonyms.
Yeah.
I was saying. So again,
Yeah.
is the yeah.
You're back now.
Yeah, there was a little bit of lag there, so we lost a bit of your. You've frozen now. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Are you back with us?
Can you hear us? No, I think he's frozen there.
He must have a bad connection.
Yeah, it looks as if the connection.
Or maybe
So
you're
it can
saying.
it can happen. It can happen. The connection.
I was just saying, sorry to interrupt, Niram, that I used to be the darkest person sitting on the bus. I'm no longer that person. I'm still the most handsome, but I'm not the darkest anymore, and I'm very satisfied with that. Now, on a serious note, I think that's very sad, because you want to experience the country and you cannot anymore. Now, it's more and more the case that being in Ireland or being in France or in Italy is the same. So that's very sad, even from an empirical point of view. Because you want to experience life, you want to access the real things. You cannot, because
Even Portugal.
everywhere is the same, even Portugal.
Yeah. I mean, I was in Rio Maior, a very small Portuguese city 2 weeks ago. And I would say more than half of the people there were Bangladeshis and Pakistanis. Yeah. I mean, the majority of people in the town center were not Portuguese. So,
Not talking about a big city, talking about
it's a very small city. Yeah. And, if we're going to talk about whether this is irrevocable or not, whether anything can be done, I mean, one of the main things that patriotic people can do is have children. Actually, if we haven't talked a lot about radical feminism, but radical feminism was really responsible for this idea that sex is just for fun, and that women should behave more like men and just have as many lovers as they like and just use men for fun. And I don't want to sound too puritanical. I certainly haven't lived a puritanical life myself, but this is a dangerous idea. Once women get this idea that life is really about just having fun and their career, and it has nothing to do with family anymore, this is the problem we have. The replacement rate in Britain now is 1.44, I think, per couple. It's not nearly enough, and as long as we're not having enough children, the immigrants are going to keep coming in, and the ruling classes are not going to do anything to stop them. So we really have to get back to this idea of family, and as Niram was saying about Edmund Burke, you've got to transmit the values of the society to somebody, and we've got to get back to having children.
Yes, we have to be fixed within a greater project beyond ourselves. We are custodians of something which we hand to future generation, and it's our duty to generate future generations as well. You raise an interesting point also with regard to feminism, and I don't think we have time to discuss it this evening. Ownership of one's body, whether it's unconditional, we have unconditional ownership of one's body, but we might just be putting too many irons in the fire for this evening. Niram, we missed you. You disappeared for a while.
I disappeared suddenly. I know I had a problem with the internet connection.
Yeah,
I'm sorry about that.
No, it happens. It happens. All is forgiven as long as you're back.
Thanks.
Anyway.
I think we'll come to a closure now. It's now 1.5 hours. As we're just saying, there are a couple of topics that we could expand, but unfortunately, we are now coming to an end. But maybe that's something that we can bring it up in the upcoming webinars. Marco, that on Monday. Our next webinar is on Monday. We already have a separate topic, but we can bring this back, these families. There is so much to be discussed. Yeah. So I think there is room for plenty of other things here. So we'll keep the forum open in the right sense.
Certainly worthy.
Let's come to an end, gentlemen. So I want to thank everyone for joining. I think you added a lot of value, and there's more to come. So
yes, indeed.
Yes. For it. So, go ahead, Marco.
No, I was just saying there is indeed a lot to come. We have to think of new candidates for the golden sausage, of course.
Can the golden sausage be attributed to a woman, Marco?
Since absolutely, inclusion and inclusivity and diversity dictate that possibility. The sky's the limit. Opportunity knocks, as the late great Huey Green used to say. Garry Craig will remember. Do you remember the late great Huey Green? It's your votes that bring them back.
Yeah, actually, Sage. We attributed this award to Keir Starmer, and I was watching an interview of Andrew Tate this morning, and I like Andrew Tate and I don't. I just want to make it clear. And he was saying, Keir Starmer is not a woman, he's not a man either. So that tells that it's possible to give it to someone in the middle. Let's put it like that. So it's possible. So thank you guys for joining. There's more to come. I just want to tell to the audience, so the next session won't happen on Wednesday because myself, I'm the one to blame. I have an event here in Dublin, so we will be catching up on Monday, same time, same channel, and the topic will be more Israel related. I don't want to reveal it 100%, but it's more on the Middle East side of the house. Let's put it that way. So thanks everyone, guys. If you haven't subscribed, please do, because that's how this thing gets spread. If you know someone who hasn't watched this discussion and may benefit from it, share. This is going to be available on YouTube. Once we finish, it's there, so everyone can access without any concerns. And if you enjoy it, we'll be glad to see it recognized with a thumbs up. So thanks everyone, and talk to you very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cheers, guys.